Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Unpacking Community Foundation Trends for Fiscal Year 2022 Annual CF Insights Survey Results. We will begin shortly. For any technical issues, please submit a message through the chat at the bottom of your screen or email us at webinars@cof.org. For automated live transcript, there's the setting at the bottom of your screen to select Show Subtitles or View Live Transcript. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared alongside any resources mentioned today and posted on our website, as well as shared with our participants. Finally, if you have any questions throughout today's conversation, please use the Q&A feature and we'll be sure to get to your question. At this time, I will hand it over to Dave Rosado, our Senior Advisor for Community Philanthropy here at the Council on Foundations.
Thanks so much, Melissa, and thanks everybody for joining us today on this Tuesday. My name is Dave Rosado, Senior Advisor, Community Philanthropy, and I'm really excited to be speaking with two of your peers at the Park County Community Foundation, Annie Beaver, Director of Finance and Administration at the Park County Community Foundation, and her colleague Amanda Hester, Operations Manager. I'm going to be allowing them in to join with me in discussion in just a little while, but I'm going to kick things off here first by talking a little bit about CF Insights, or Community Foundation Insights, our annual survey, and the latest findings of that annual survey. But to kick things off, let me just say a little bit first about CF Insights and the survey and why we're all here together for anybody who might be among the uninitiated. CF Insights, again, or Community Foundation Insights, is hosted by the Council on Foundations to provide community foundations with the ability to benchmark their organizational makeup, performance, and growth with peers across the country to help them make informed decisions. We conduct a survey each year, the annual survey, that tracks field-wide growth trends and some of the key differences between community foundations of different sizes, geographies, community makeup, and a number of different factors. It's mainly, but not entirely, focused on financial metrics like asset mix, operating revenue, and expenses, and grant making by product. The survey was previously known as the Columbus Survey, as the Columbus Foundation worked to collect this data for about 20 years before it moved over to CF Insights, where it's been hosted since. We've expanded the survey a handful of times to include data points like staffing by functional area, donor-advised fund dormancy policies, operating reserves and endowments, engagement with and adoption of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and a whole lot of other new data points that we've been adding to the survey over time. The survey is open to the entire field of community foundations, so we do invite all community foundations to participate in the survey with us. And because of that, we want to make sure that the survey is always shaped in a way that that can provide you with actionable insights and data to make decisions at your own respective organization. So what that means is that we're always open to feedback about the survey. Please do send us any questions or concerns about the survey or the questions we're asking there at any time. One of the last slides that we display near the end is going to contain some contact information that you can use to share some of that feedback. So please do write us with any concerns or questions again about the survey or the findings. We just want to make sure that the survey is tracking what you need to know to understand how the field is evolving and how you might use the information to inform changes to your own community foundation and how you operate. So that is a little bit of background about the survey itself and a little bit of background about CF Insights. But what were some of the key findings from fiscal year 2022, which is the latest survey that we conducted? Let's first start with a little bit of a breakdown of the sample. This is going to be the most data-dense slide that we look at here because these all sort of speak to the makeup of the survey respondents that participated in the survey this time or shared some data points with us here. These are all data points that show what our respondent pool looked like this round. We reliably get around 200 community foundations each year, representing different geographies, asset size ranges, population sizes, and all these other different ways to differentiate themselves. But let's focus here on the upper left-hand corner of the slide and just take a look at the fact that the Midwest actually has quite strong representation with about half of the sample. But given the fact that there are a lot of very small community foundations that happen to be within that portion of the sample, you could see that even though there are more than half of all community foundations that participated, they actually held a little bit less than a third of all of the assets being represented in this sample. Let me actually just take a quick pause here and express my gratitude to the Indiana Philanthropy Alliance, one of our very good partners. They have roughly 90 community foundations who reliably take their member survey, and they've shared the data from their member survey with us so that we can add it to this sample as well. So much appreciation to the folks in Indiana. Um, and so, as I mentioned, a lot of those Midwest community foundations are on the smaller side, and you could see that in contrast to the Western region, for example, here, where they only represent about 16% of the community foundations who took the survey, while representing roughly the same proportion of asset dollars, right? Of course, the Western region includes organizations like the Silicon Valley Community Foundation, the California Community Foundation, the San Francisco Foundation, so a handful of the very largest community foundations in the country, and of course, the very largest community foundation in the country. Um, so that is a breakdown of our sample based on geography, but you could see how we have some fairly widespread of respondents among asset size and population size as well, and you can see that on the right-hand side of the slide. So really, every asset size cohort is fairly well represented in terms of their relativity, you could say, to other asset size cohorts. And as I mentioned, community foundations that participated serve populations of many different sizes. On the bottom left-hand side, you can see the breakdown between community foundations by service density, and there's fairly strong representation here among those serving rural communities. We have a little bit more than a third of respondents serve just rural communities or say that they just serve rural communities, with the largest portion of our sample telling us that they serve both rural and urban areas. That's that lighter blue portion there, that 41%. And in just a little while, you're going to hear from one of those rural serving community foundations when I do welcome Annie and Amanda in for our discussion to bring some of that rural perspective. But now that we've taken a look at the sample of community foundations that participated, let's take a look at the data. And let's start with total assets for everybody that participated in 2022. That is the collective asset total versus the previous year. Our sample this time was actually a little bit bigger than it was a year ago. So we had, what I mean by that is we had more community foundations participate this year than last year. But I will also say that there was a lot of overlap between the 2 years and virtually one-to-one overlap among the largest community foundations who represent the vast majority of these dollars. You could see that, despite that larger sample, there's a bit of a drop off here in terms of the total assets that are being reported among those 220 plus community foundations, nearly 230 actually, with the median community foundation experiencing an 11% decrease in assets, in no small part because of the broader economic climate in 2022 and its impact on invested assets across the entire field. Now, of course, there were other patterns that we saw in fundraising and grant making in 2022 that also played a role in this, and we're going to take a look at that on the very next slide. Our community foundations in total fundraised about just under $16 billion in 2022, which is down roughly 19% from the previous year when fundraising totals approached $20 billion in 2021. The median year-over-year fundraising decrease, right? So the median foundation experienced a 1% decrease. So, basically flat, effectively flat. But that, of course, also means that half of all participants saw some level of decrease in fundraising from 2021 into 2022. At the same time, grant making totals continued to climb, with the median community foundation increasing their grant making by 7%. So taken together, right? Fundraising down, grant making up, these also contributed to some of those asset declines as more dollars were going out for several community foundations as we're coming in that particular year in 2022. So this really reflects a field that continues to mobilize resources when they're most needed. And given the broader economic climate of the time, it was even more critical to get those resources out into everyone's respective communities. So let's look at this a different way. And let's actually focus on the 100 largest community foundations by asset size over the last 10 years. So this is a longitudinal chart that's looking from 2013 to 2022. And what we did is we lifted out a subset of the larger sample, right? The largest 100 community foundations by asset size. They together hold over 90% of all the dollars in the entire field. And this is also a consistent sample. So we can take a look at just those 100 over the last 10 years, and you could see how much they actually reflect the last couple of data points that I mentioned already in terms of the asset declines, and as we'll see on the next slide, in terms of fundraising and grant making changes year over year. So you could see that assets were down 2022 from 2021, and that was the first decline since 2020. Since for a handful of years, actually, for very many years, since right around, not in the last 10 years, actually. I was thinking in 2018, but no, it kind of held steady, went up very slightly. So really, this is the first decline in assets among this group for a very long time. And you could see that the fundraising total decreased significantly from the year before, right? So as I mentioned, for the entire total, it was right around $20 billion, and it was just under $20 billion for the 100 largest community foundations. So given the significant jump that this group saw in 2021, right, they went from $12.6 billion all the way up to 19.7. It would be hard to expect that that total would continue to increase even more. But still, the lingering effects of the pandemic on the broader uncertain economy of the time, rising inflation, related impacts on individuals' ability to give are all contributing factors here. And at the same time, you could see that grant making continued its long-term climb. So grant making has reached a new high in 9 out of the last 10 years, except for that slight dip right there in 2019. There was a slight dip in 2019 in both fundraising and grant making, but other than that year, grant making has continued to climb. And fundraising, for the most part, has continued to climb all the way up until 2021 before the dip in 2022. But given, again, that grant making continued to climb, even as fundraising declined in 2022, you could see, again, how resilient an engine community foundation giving is in the face of varied and growing and evolving community needs. Taken together, right, investment performance, the drop in fundraising, the relative drop in fundraising, increased grant making, it won't be at all surprising to see that assets decrease the way that they did over that same period of time. So let's zoom in a little bit and focus on donor advised funds specifically. So if we zoom in a bit on those, these are the top level totals among all donor advised funds that were reported among the sample, right? You could see just how significant they are given the proportion of dollars they represent. So in 2022, nearly 2/3 of all grant making dollars, or about $9.4 billion, came out of DAFs hosted by community foundations. That grant making total is higher than the fundraising total of about $9.2 billion, which is a reversal from most years, and also is a reversal from 2021 when fundraising was higher. Fundraising was over $11 billion in 2021, and grant making sat at around $7 billion in the same year. DAF assets and fundraising decreased from 2021, while grant making from DAFs increased. So again, a resilient vehicle of community support for a set of funds that are set up to grow over time and maintain consistently high grant making activity during years of economic downturn, when those resources are most needed. Now, to underline that last point on high DAF grant making activity, you could see that for every asset size cohort in our sample, the distribution rates, or the grant to asset ratio within donor advised funds or among donor advised funds, is consistently higher than the distribution rates for all funds, right? So you could see that those double digits, for the most part, double digit distribution rates for many of our asset size cohorts, those are from donor advised funds. And the lower numbers here, the lighter blue shaded area, those are all funds at community foundations. So for the median community foundation that is between 250 and 500 million in assets, their distribution rate from DAFs is 11% and 8% for all funds at that median community foundation. Now you're going to see that smaller community foundations tend to be more made up of endowed funds for the most part, and have fewer DAFs, which is why you're going to see distribution rates that are closer to that 4 to 6% range. Whereas as you start to climb in terms of asset size, larger community foundations with more pass-through funds and more DApps in their portfolios are going to show higher distribution rates. And so those are some of the high level data points that we saw in the 2022 survey, right? In terms of the change rates in terms of assets and fundraising and grant making, and particularly among DApps. So what I'm going to do here is close this section out with a few other data points to demonstrate how we are able to compare community foundations across asset size cohorts as well. So first, let's start with full-time, or rather funds per full-time equivalent, which is represented by the light blue bars on the slide, right? So you can see that these are the lighter blue bars. This shows the number of funds managed per staff person at the median community foundation within each of these cohorts. So again, if I took the median community foundation that's between $100 and $250 million in assets, right? So the median community foundation within that portion of the sample, they have 50 funds for every staff person that they have on staff, right? So basically, the higher that number is, right? So as this number is higher, so the number of funds per staff person is, as that number increases, the more likely it is that your staff have somewhat limited capacity to maintain high levels of service to your donors if you continue to grow your portfolios without adding to your headcount, right? So if you're at 50 funds per staff person today, and you increase that to 55 or 60 or 65 or 70, but you don't increase your staff size, that is a higher number of donors that your staff have to support, right? And so that has more of an impact on their capacity than a lower number of donors might. So if you lead or work at a community foundation and you happen to sit within one of these asset size cohorts, you could see how close or how far you are to that median and assess whether that reflects how much available capacity your staff have to take on additional work or to take on a growing donor portfolio. Now, the dark blue bars are the median number of full-time equivalents for each cohort, right? The median number of staff, basically, of full-time staff. So you're not going to be surprised to see that as asset size increases, you're likely to see larger staff sizes, right? So there are more staff, there are larger portfolios to service. And so you're going to see that even as that donor portfolio increases, right, with the increase in asset size, you're still going to see that number come down. It's part of that is the scaling, right? So they have a lot more staff. They might have more staff in specialized positions that don't work with donors. And so you're going to see that the number of funds per full-time equivalent come down as asset size goes up and as staff size goes up. That is a reflection on staff capacity as it relates to asset size. And then this last slide here, taking a look at another key difference between asset size cohorts is actually a new data point for us that we're presenting here today for the first time. So if you've been following CF Insights for a long time, but haven't ever gotten full access to the benchmarking tool, this is actually going to be a newer data point to you all. And this is one that I was looking very forward to presenting here today, because one of the really exciting benefits of the transition of CF Insights to the Council from Candid last year is how much more connected, at least I feel, to the broader conversations that are happening in the field, in addition to all of the one-on-one conversations that I already engage in with individual members or individual community foundations. This is a good example of that broader connection because of the larger size of the council's network of community foundations that I now interact with on a more regular basis, but also this was an active conversation on the council's Philanthropy Exchange Community Forum. So a lot of you that are on the call today might already be familiar with that or might engage in that community forum. A quick plug that it is very active and very active, especially among community foundations. So you should absolutely be taking advantage of that and asking questions of your peers on that forum. You are very likely to get an answer to your question from a peer who might have dealt with the same issue or question that you did. But all of that is to say that there was a recent and quite active conversation on that forum all about operating reserves at community foundations. It was of interest. There was a decent amount of activity there, and there was some interest in seeing what they sort of considered what the industry standard might be for operating reserve as a percentage of operating budget, operating reserve as a percentage of assets. that they can see how close or how far they might be from the median community foundation in either of those data points. So decided to include it here because we do have the data. It's not published on our website just yet. It's here in the slide deck, so I will point out in case anybody's interested in seeing this or getting a copy of these slides. We are more than happy to distribute those to everybody who registered. So just letting you know that you can have access to this after this session. And we're always thinking of different ways to present the data on our website as well. So again, if you have thoughts or if there's a particular data point that you think we might collect that you think would be helpful to see on that website, let us know. We are more than happy to take that under consideration and maybe update the online published report that we put out as well. So this is operating reserve as a percentage of operating budgets and as a percentage of assets. And so conventional wisdom here is that if you're a nonprofit, you ideally anyway want to be able to cover about 6 months of expenses. So that would be a 50% budget, or rather 50% reserve to budget ratio. And you can see that for everyone who told us they had an operating reserve, the medians are right around there or even better than that, right? One thing I want to point out here is that this does only include those telling us that they had a reserve. So I will point out that 24% of respondents at least didn't tell us that they had a reserve. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't have one, but there were 24% of respondents who didn't report having one. So some number of them might have an operating endowment or something like that. But of the remaining 76%, these are the medians that were emerged from each of those asset size cohorts. I've included here also 2 other data points around operating budgets, right? So the median operating budget increase from 21 to 22 was about 9%, and about 3/4 of all of our respondents reported having an operating budget increase or increasing their operating budget from 21 to 22. So, those are, interrelated data points that you want to keep in mind as you maintain your operating reserve. So if you want to maintain that 6-month operating reserve, you want to just make sure you have that in mind as you increase your budget, because that, of course, operating reserve would have to grow with that budget as well. Reserve to asset ratio tracks pretty similarly to the last slide in terms of the economy of scale phenomenon that I mentioned, right? So in general, asset size increases. You're going to see that the reserve to operating budget ratio also decreases, right? It's a lot of that is scale because we're talking about very, very large community foundations. But as far as how much of their operating budget they're able to cover, it's at least at 50% for many of our respondents to this survey. So those are a handful of data points that I wanted to present here. These all came out of the 2022 survey. We have so many more data points that we collect from that survey, but this is only the tip of the iceberg. Many other data points are published on our website as well. So very much invite you all to visit our website. We're going to display the URL at the end as well, so you can explore the findings on your own. But again, if you have any questions, either about anything that I mentioned here, or even as you explore the website, you can reach out to us. But let me just pause here and say that if you do have any questions that we can answer here on this webinar, absolutely let us know. We're going to have ample time for a Q&A at the near the conclusion of the session. So please do share your questions with us in the Q&A box, and we will be happy to address those. Now for just before we bring Annie and Amanda in, I'm going to say a little bit about the different data points that are available on the CF Insights platform, and particularly the data points that are available to community foundations that have a Plus membership with the council. These are only a handful of data points that are available to you. So they include, asset size. You can track that over time, asset mix, average fund size, distribution rates, expense to asset ratio, operating reserve, operating endowment, funds per FTE, staffing by functional area. All of these and several other data points are available on our website, where if you have a Plus membership with the council, you can pull up individual community foundations data by foundation name. So if you have a handful of community foundations are your closest peers, or we can work with you to identify who those peers are, you can look up individual community foundations, compare yourselves to them, and be able to use that data to make actionable decisions at your community foundations that are tactical shifts in, in terms of staffing by functional area, in terms of how much you might focus on the growth of a particular product, right? Whether it be, an increased investment in growing your DAF portfolio, an increased investment in some other area at the community foundation, and all of those data points here are designed to help you determine who your peers are and how you compare so that you can make some of those decisions. So what I'm going to be able to do here for just a couple of minutes is I'm going to share a different screen and I'm going to demonstrate how the benchmarking tool works. So give me 1 second. This is the magic of a live webinar, doing some behind the scenes screen share adjustments. And here we are. So here, what we're looking at here is the CF Insights benchmarking tool. As I mentioned, right, all of the data that is published on our website is, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, in the aggregate, right? So you can see what the median community foundation looks like within a particular asset size cohort. But if you want to look at individual community foundations and compare yourselves to them specifically, that will be something that you will have to do on the CF Insights data platform. So I'm going to show you what that looks like. And this right here is something that is designed to be intuitive, designed to be very responsive. It pulls in data as data come in. So if you are a community foundation that has access to this, you don't need to wait until we publish our latest annual survey findings. You can visit this page anytime. As we collect community foundation survey data, you will have real-time access to that on this page. And so you can see the very latest that we have even before we publish them on our website as an aggregated report. So what I'm going to do here is find a demo peer group that I've set up ahead of time. And this is my community foundation peer group. When you scroll down the page here, you could see that there are a handful of characteristics that I've pre-selected. You can add as many characteristics as you want. I'm just going to click this a handful of times so you can see what I mean. So what I'm doing here is I'm telling the database to give me community foundations that are between 150 and $250 million in asset size that have at least 5 full-time equivalents, right? But you can continue to add other data points as well. So if you want to say, but I also want to make sure that their donor advised funds make up at least, I don't know, let's say 15% of their portfolio, you can add that as an additional characteristic, and you can continue to add filtering characteristics until you get to exactly the characteristics that you want. Once you are done with that and you've finished adding all of your characteristics, you can click the Show Results button. And as I mentioned, this is just a very responsive platform. So it works very quickly behind the scenes to pull in community foundations that meet all of those criteria. You're going to see a listing of community foundation by name. You're going to see all of the characteristics that you've pulled in into your search, right? So I said, give me only community foundations between 150 and 250 that have at least, I think it was 4 staff or 5 staff. Yep. That have at least 5 full-time equivalents, whose donor advised funds make up at least 15% of their portfolio. I probably could have gone with a higher number based on the percentages that you see here, but you get the idea in terms of how this works. If you want to bring in other metrics, right? If you want to bring in other columns, but you don't necessarily want to use those columns as filters, you can click this metrics button and you can click add new metrics. And I'm just going to click a handful here just to show you how this works. I'm going to click, let's see, region and year foundation created. And let's go with finance, number of finance staff. And I'm going to click apply. And then you can see how quickly the table refreshes and pulls in those additional data points. If you add enough data points, you might have to scroll left or right to see everything, but they are all going to be there. And you can export this table into an Excel file so that you can create charts or do different calculations offline with that Excel file. There are also a handful of charts at the bottom of this page. So if you wanted to compare yourself your own community foundation to your peers, you can do that by clicking any of these charts that are linked to at the very bottom. So funds per FTE, right? Again, that sort of quick, that quick metric to sort of assess staffing capacity at your different community foundations. If you're, if you're somebody that's on this side of the spectrum, right? So if you have the smallest number here, you might want to reflect on that, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that your staff have extra capacity for you to bring on a whole lot of new a whole lot of new donors for them to work with. But you could see that in comparison to your peers, and again, with that additional context, determine whether or not your staff have additional capacity to serve new donors without necessarily having to add additional staff to serve them. Um, so that's just a quick way to be able to take advantage of some of these additional data points here. But the more powerful feature on this page is definitely up here, because you can click that metrics button. You can add as many columns as you want to pull in additional data points. And then once you have all the data that you want to work with, then you can export that offline, run your calculations, add that to a report to your board, or to your senior leadership team to help inform, the addition of new staff capacity, anything around your fee levels, all of those different types of, tactical shifts that you might consider at your community foundation can be informed by the data points that you pull from this website. So that is a quick demo here. I'm going to switch back to my slides and just share one more thing before I bring in Annie and Amanda. And I think we're back on the slides. Yes, okay, perfect. Let me click through some of these here and just share this. Because if you are a newer council member or a newer council member with Plus membership access, right? CF Insights access to that benchmarking tool, and you don't really know where to start, we could support you. So that's one of the benefits of becoming a Plus Community Foundation member, is we will actually work with you one-on-one to identify who your peers are. We'll ask you a number of questions to determine what kinds of tactical shifts you might be considering, who you consider to be your closest peers. And if you don't know really the answer to that last question, we will help you determine who your peers might be by pulling a number of different data reports to see who is similar to you in a number of key ways. But once we identify who those peers are, we will create a dashboard that looks a lot like this. We will work with you to customize it and pull in the data points that you want to see. But that is a benefit of Plus membership. If you saw that benchmarking tool and think, I wouldn't know where to start if I got access to that tomorrow, this is a good way to get started. And we help you, again, determine who your peers are and create something like this for you so that you can become more familiar with the data and use that as a way to sort of springboard into the other data points that we make available on the benchmarking tool as well. So if you want to participate in this, if you want to be part of this survey sample and you happen not to be just yet, you can contribute to these findings at any time by going to data.cfinsights.org. If you have a Council on Foundations login, you already have a login to the CF Insights data platform as well. You can use those same exact credentials to log into the data platform and participate in our survey. The more of you participate in the survey, the stronger and more comprehensive our data set becomes, and we can say a whole lot more about how the field is evolving over time. So really just invite everybody to take part in that survey. And then I will come back here to this, but if you want to reach out to us, these are a couple of email addresses. Mine is at the bottom. cfinsights@cof.org is an inbox that's monitored by multiple people. So you can email that and you will get a response to your question right away. So I am going to stop sharing here and I'm going to invite in Annie Beaver and Amanda Hester. Here we go. I'm going to stop sharing. There it is. There we are. And let me just say a tiny little bit about both of you. So Annie Beaver, right, Director of Finance and Administration at the Park County Community Foundation, first joined the foundation as a board member in 2013, serving as vice chair and treasurer for several years before joining the staff in 2021. Her early career was in nonprofit development for Common Cause in Washington, D.C., March of Dimes in Minneapolis, and Carroll College in Helena, Montana. Annie also spent 9 years in the financial services industry, helping clients strategize for and invest in their financial futures. And Amanda Hester held management positions in both the federal government and the financial industry, and previously served in the role of office and finance coordinator at the foundation, at the Park County Community Foundation, before becoming operations manager. Her other recent experience included a focus on nonprofit project management and operations consulting. So again, Annie and Amanda, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for
Yes,
having us.
thank you.
Wonderful. So thank you both again for joining today. And I was actually thrilled to welcome you and the Park County Community Foundation as one of our newest full members of CF Insights of the Plus member community foundation, when we were at the time working on completing the transition actually of CF Insights from candidate to the council last year. So before we get to how you use the data since joining, I would be really interested to hear how these these survey data findings were reflected at your own community foundation. So first, before we even get into that, can you share some top level facts about your community foundation in terms of who you serve, your asset mix, and size, and average grant making?
Yes, absolutely. We are located in Livingston, Montana, which is on the banks of the Yellowstone River and just a bit north of Yellowstone National Park. And we serve the entirety of Park County, which has a population of only about 17,000 people. But in terms of land mass, Park County is the size of the state of Delaware. So we're a beautiful rural county that has traditionally had a culture and economy based on ranching and the railroad, but it also includes significant tourism, and it has become a really attractive place for second home owners and retirees who have a lot of capacity to give. PCCF is about 18 years old, and most of our growth has been in the past 5 or 6 years. We've grown from net assets of 1.5 million to 14 million in the past 5 years. The bulk of that is in our quasi endowment, which is now at about 10 million. We also have a permanent endowment of 350,000, and we accepted our first charitable gift annuity of 100,000 a year ago, and our second of 150,000 just in December. We have a really pretty small donor advised fund program. It's about 8 funds totaling $200,000, and we only hold 1 scholarship. I think our donor advised fund program is something that we would like to dedicate some more time and attention to developing. We also have about 1.5 million held in reserve for some restricted programming, including a grant that we received to start an arts council, and we'll be awarding out those funds in the next few months. Over the past 10 years or so, our grant making has grown considerably, but we have ways to go to be where we would like to be. 10 years ago, we were granting about $35,000 a year, and this year we'll be granting about 10 times that, $350,000 in our competitive grants program. But we also raise and distribute another $425,000 in a match for our community giving program, which is called Give a Hoot.
Thanks so much for that, Annie. I love the name of that. So thank you for sharing all of that. So now that we have a little bit of insight into the makeup of your community foundation, I want to jump back to some of the data that we we were just sort of exploring from 2022. So I discussed how the data in our latest survey pointed to reductions in assets, and particularly in fundraising in 22. And just understanding a little bit about your community foundation and how much you depend on fundraising to support your operations. Can you talk a little bit about what you do to be successful at doing that in general, and how you did in 2022?
Yeah, we have been pretty successful at unrestricted fundraising, and I think in part that's due to being really pretty diligent about requesting multi-year pledges, which takes the pressure off some, obviously. And we've been able to have enough net revenue at the end of the year to move funds into our quasi endowment each year. We were also able to raise the profile of our organization in our community. Maybe you recall seeing photos of the terrible flooding in the Yellowstone River a couple of years ago. And we were able to be part of an effort to raise significant funds for people affected by that flooding and quickly distribute those disaster relief funds to members of our community. And while that's a terrible situation, it has helped us be really seen as a reliable and nimble resource in our community. And it has helped us make some pretty good inroads with high net worth donors who love this area. People from around the world, in fact, responded to that, which did help our fundraising in the year and year and a half following that. But the largest jump for us was the result of many years of working with one of our most passionate and generous supporters, who left us an unrestricted gift of over $8 million, which we transferred to our quasi-endowment.
It's really, thank you for that. And, it's just really interesting to hear that story, because especially for folks who've been in the field for any amount of time, really, you probably heard that old adage of like, you've seen one community foundation, and if you've seen one community foundation, you've seen one community foundation. And so because, of the 800 plus community foundations, even more than that, across the country, there are very different, they have different donors, different communities, and are just operating in different contexts. And so you just never know what commonalities you might find as you connect with different community foundations across the field. And I think even, just having you speak on this webinar is a great way for folks who, might be, addressing some of the same questions that you did, might reflect on your own experience as well. So it's really helpful to hear all of this. And, since that was 2022, of course, we had an entire year passed since then. And so curious to know how 2023 looked for you. What was your internal focus last year? What were you aiming to do? How successful were you at that? And what were some of your outcomes from that?
Sure. Well, Amanda will take part of this question too, but I'll get it started. And to your point about if you know one community foundation, one community foundation, that really was part of our thinking in 2023, because we felt like surely we could learn from other community foundations. We were developing and getting some traction, but wanted to know what we didn't know. And I think the most important thing we did in 2023 was to take the time to ask ourselves if we were spending time on the right things, because unrestricted fundraising efforts, they're great for the year that you're in, but they don't really help you develop a more sustainable path, obviously. So we knew we were doing pretty well with some things, but we wanted to know what other organizations like ours did and what we could learn from them, because we weren't even really sure what kind of comparisons there were in terms of what we could be doing or should be doing to create a stronger and more sustainable future. So we're really grateful to go through that insights benchmarking process with you last year and choose some peer organizations that were similar to us based on some metrics, but maybe not so similar to us on others, and groups that we thought of were more aspirational. And so going through that process, we understood that we were probably on a pretty unsustainable path, and that we needed to stop balancing so much on the leg of one stool, which was the unrestricted fundraising leg, and try to have a more balanced approach. So our big learning opportunity last year was to get pretty serious about trying to transition to a more sustainable approach that includes operating revenue coming from unrestricted fundraising and distributions from our quasi-endowment, since we have developed that now, and trying to create more administrative fee revenue. Amanda?
We also shifted our thinking on our key success metrics. And so rather than measure our success on net revenue earned from these past unrestricted fundraising efforts, we turned our focus towards measuring success based on annual growth in grant distributions back to the community, as well as annual growth in the number of nonprofits within our county that are supported by our programs and initiatives. And we're pleased to report that we distributed a record amount of funding to our community in 2023, more than $3 million this year, which was a high watermark for us. And we're well positioned for 2024 to be our strongest year yet.
That's really great. And, you were speaking a little bit, started to speak a little bit to how you were able to use data to really help you map out, your work plan for last year, moving into this year, and some of your strategizing. So I think that might be a good segue into the last question that I have for you two. And before I even ask that, let me just one more time let folks know that you can absolutely use the Q&A box to share any of your questions with us about anything that Annie and Amanda are sharing here, anything about CF Insights data or Plus membership. Happy to address those here. We will have time to address your questions live, so please feel free to share those. And in the meantime, let me just ask about how you've used this data to inform your plan. So, again, you joined just a few months ago, right? So in the middle of last year, in the second half of last year. But I know that you told me that in a previous conversation that you've already been able to make some practical use of that data, which is really great to hear. That's why we have this set up. So just really great to hear that. And on that, just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit about what you were looking to find out, how you used the data set to help you answer those questions, and what were the specific tactical shifts that you were able to make that were informed by the data.
Absolutely. So as you all know, David, effective data analysis really involves comparing your data to other relevant data, adding some context, and then kind of taking a look and seeing, what next steps develop from the findings. And so, that was sort of our goal when we reached out to CF Insights in the middle of next year, was to find ways to make our data more meaningful and to find out how we can visualize and display that data within our organization more effectively. And so using the tools and guidance from the CF Insights team, we put our data from the previous 3 years to work, and we were able to identify both current organizational peers as well as some aspirational peers. We didn't necessarily define our peers in the way that others might. We looked for organizations and communities like ours, either tourist hubs or large part-time residents communities that might have similar capacities to give as our own. Once we had identified those peers, we wanted to get into those metrics and see what we could judge out from all of that data. So we compared things like operating budget, number of full-time employees, asset size, and their revenue structure. Things like their earnings on admin fees versus unrestricted gifts, the amount of granting organizations of our size were achieving year over year as compared with our peers. And so all of this information allowed us to distill out potential growth areas. It confirmed sort of what we already knew, but we now had backed by data, that we needed to build out the number and diversity of our funds that our organization was handling. We really needed to revamp our fee structure and find ways to grow passive revenue from these fees rather than keep relying on this sort of boots on the ground, unrestricted fundraising year over year. And so visualizing this data into some of the dashboards and charts and features that CF Insights allows for, gave us enough buy-in from our board of directors to approve the hiring of a director of philanthropy this year who will focus on this revised growth strategy. One of the key questions our board asks us when we show our fundraising results or the amount that we earn in fees is sort of, is this good? How does this compare to peers? And so having these visual metrics and the ability to compare ourselves to similar organizations, or even those organizations that we want to be similar to, has been game-changing for us. Going through this process also brought to light that we need a better system for managing all of our data, including gifts in, gifts out, and our overall donor information. And so this allowed us to shop for and pitch for a platform geared specifically towards community foundations to our board and get their support in the investment. And so we're really pleased to report that we just kicked off that transition and hope to have a new fully functional combined accounting and CRM system up and running by the end of Q1. So that was huge. I mean, that was a big, big piece of it. And then as far as aspirational peers, it allowed us to identify organizations positioned where we envision ourselves in 3 to 5 years, building a larger asset size, larger endowment size, having robust operating revenue off of admin fees, and more importantly, having a slightly larger staff to manage all of that. And so it gave us a basis for potential targets like the number of funds per FTE that we felt was reasonable, or asset size versus, operating budget, to determine what would be realistic for our organization going forward. And the piece that Annie and I have really loved is we've been able to make connections with some of these peers to share ideas, policies, and procedures to help us get where we want to be in the future. So overall, just in the year that we've been working with CF Insights, we've been able to prepare ourselves for some huge growth. It's helped us turn our historic data from a pile of numbers and figures into something meaningful and actionable. And so that's allowed us to seek the support we need from our board to focus on well-planned strategic growth for our organization over the next 3 to 5 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that, Amanda. And yeah, I mean, it's just really great to hear that you've been able to make such practical shifts at your community foundation that that will be able to provide such a positive impact on the ways you work and just having the capacity that you need to fulfill your mission. So that's really why this is all set up here, right? I think that you make a really good point near there at the end in terms of like the pile of numbers, right? And having that context is such an important part of that puzzle. And I think that that's really where a lot of the value of being connected with this comes from, because you're able to get connected with other community foundations that have access to this tool as well, so that you can strategize together, ask each other questions, share successes, even share some of the challenges that you may have run into. And so given how generous this field consistently has been, in my experience working with individual members and connecting them with each other, it's that really is the other piece of the puzzle that takes you well beyond the data and to again where you can make some positive changes. So again, really want to thank you both, Annie and Amanda. I'm going to pause here and see if we have any questions. I don't see any open questions yet from anybody in the audience. We do have the Q&A box, so if you want to share any questions, please feel free to put them in the box right here. We will maybe give folks a few seconds in case anything comes up, but otherwise I will go ahead and close this out if nothing comes in. Maybe be prepared to share my last 2 slides here again. All right, let me see. Here we go. Back to the screen share. All right, wonderful. I'm going to leave this up here for just a few seconds. While I again thank Annie and Amanda for joining us from the Park County Community Foundation in Montana. It's been such a joy to work with you. I look forward to continuing to support you moving forward. So just really happy to have you join and for taking part of this conversation as well. So again, thank you for being a part of this with us. And to close us out, I'm just going to remind folks that they can visit our website to learn more about CF Insights. So that's cof.org/CF Insights. And we have the 2 email addresses up on the slide. I do see a question has come in, so I'm going to read that question before we go, but let me just quickly mention cfinsights@cof.org, david.rosado, if you want to reach out directly to me. And so we are more than happy to answer any questions that you might have. And again, if you're already taking part or participating with the Open Exchange or the Philanthropy Exchange on cof.org, just know that when something comes up there and gets a lot of interest and there's a lot of conversation around it, we just might have that data point on CF Insights. So again, just really encourage you to participate in that as well, because it helps to inform what we do here. And let's see, so we do have a question that has come in. Oh, and this is a big question. I might turn this over to you, Annie and Amanda, and I'll give it some thought as well. So we do have a question. Are there any subjective, unidentified metrics that contribute to success that you encountered beyond the existing data? And so Alicia, so I think that I'm going to take that as data that's outside of CF Insights and maybe not data that doesn't exist in general. You can feel free to clarify that. I'm just going to assume that just means if, maybe it's data that's outside of CF Insights, but metrics that contribute to success that are outside of the ones that we've worked with. Maybe I'll turn it over to you, Amanda. And Annie, any thoughts?
That, I mean, that's a good question, but it's also a
Yeah.
hard one, especially in
Yeah.
saying, a subjective metric, because it's like, well, what do we think works?
Yeah.
As I mentioned towards the end of my piece, it was really good to just take all of those numbers that we have and get them in a cohesive alignment that gave context for what they all mean to us. And that helped us really analyze our performance in a way that we hadn't been able to otherwise. I mean, it's been a short amount of time that we've been able to use this data. So it's just sort of right now conceptual change, but we're feeling really positive for how the next year is going to go. I think, other than a metric outside of the data that's driving us is always sort of our connection with our donors. Annie talked about our community. It's a fairly small one, 17,000 people, with part-time residents that get to know the full-time residents. And so I think more than anything, using that data in a way that spurs excitement and buy-in and support from our community has been really important. And that comes down to good communication and things like your annual report, board buy-in, and making sure they understand your data and are prepared to present that to prospective donors. So it's all a big, cohesive part of the puzzle. But having that data to back what you're selling or back what you're projecting to your community and to your donors is hugely helpful in validating the mission you're trying to achieve. And CF Insights has helped us there immensely.
I'll just add one thing, which is not really a metric, but it's certainly subjective. We have also made a goal this year that all the members of our team have peer learning goals where we're reaching out to other community foundations quarterly just to ask them if we can have, sort of like a virtual coffee together to understand more about what they're doing, what they're thinking about that we maybe haven't even thought about. And just trying to continue to keep our minds open to learning about what it is that we could and should be doing. And I think that this peer learning piece of it is something that's going to be important to us over time, although we don't know exactly what we're going to get out of it.
Thank you both for that. Yeah, and I think the donors is the direction I was going to go in, and as I kind of think about that question as well, because yeah, it's donor perception, right? Donor satisfaction, I think, are two metrics that are you can quantify them, right, by surveying, but are otherwise pretty subjective. Also, board engagement, board satisfaction as well. It's really huge as a reflection of how successful you are as a community foundation. I would say, I think the donor perception, and I think this goes back to the points you were just making, the two you were just making, if your staff have all of the resources that they need to do their jobs well, and they have, right, they have the resources, they have the capacity, you are set up in a way that your staff can be successful, all of those other pieces kind of fall into place, right, in terms of donor satisfaction, the ways that you serve them, and also with your board and how you engage with them. That all goes back to how well the staff are performing. If you want to think about CF Insights data in a very sort of almost reductive way, this is not entirely the case because there are some pretty some pretty advanced metrics in there, but you can almost kind of think of it in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs as being like the baseline metrics that you want to make sure to align with. And then you can just sort of use those to inform how it is that your staff work and how it's structured as well. And everything else again just kind of flows from that and falls into place. So that's what I would add to that. So the thoughts that you both shared. There's one more question. We have 2 minutes. So I'm going to let's go through this pretty quickly. So are there suggested best practices for any of the data that we are able to look at? For example, how many funds or what average we should shoot for, etc. I think that's a really great question. It is also a very common one. And I hate to answer it this way because I promise you it's not a dodge, but it really does depend. It depends on the context in which you're currently operating. And it depends even more on what your short and medium term goals are, and even your long term goals as well, but especially the short and medium term goals, because we're able to give you some snapshot data from just a year back. So it's pretty close to real time, so that you can see how you compare with some of those peers, especially if they're aspirational in some way, how you might differ in terms of available capacity and and asset makeup and, operating budgets and reserves and things like that. So there aren't really, we don't provide what I'll call harder measures of best practices in terms of you should be right here, but we are able to bring you, the averages and the medians for the community foundations that are within your cohort. But that cohort can also change, right? It might not necessarily be your asset size. It might be your geography. It might be other community foundations that are made up, similarly to your own in terms of asset mix and things like that. So we answer that question first, and then we determine what the goals are from there. So I hope that helps. But that's all to say that we work with you to define what those are, and what those goals are, and then we find the data that can be most useful to you. All right, so we are at time. Again, want to really thank Annie and Amanda and everybody for joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and do reach out with any questions or feedback. We are here and we are listening. So thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your day.